Hi, I'm Eric at Adams Leatherworks. Today we'll be making an inside the waistband holster for a 3-inch 1911. We will start by tracing around the outside of the pistol. Also, don't forget to draw in the location of your magazine release. I'm using 7 to 8 ounce thick leather on this holster. There are several methods you can use to determine your stitch lines. The method I'm using here is one that Jason Engel with Engel Gun Leather used in a video he did with learnleather.com. The video was titled The Perfect Holster Stitch Line. Basically, you take a strip of leather that's the same thickness as what you'll be building your holster with, and you wrap it around the gun and you pinch it together, and then you make a mark and measure the length between the two marks. And then you take that measurement and divide it by 2. In this example, A is the dimension at the trigger guard and B is around the slide at the barrel. Start by centering the gun on your narrowest dimension. In my example, it's 2 1/4 inches. And then I'm going to make a parallel line along the top of the slide. And then I'll use my other dimension and place that stitch line. And now I'm just connecting a straight line between those 2 points. Now I'm going to continue that stitch offset around the trigger guard so I can fill in the rest of my stitch line. I'll be building this holster with a 15-degree forward cant. So right now I'm drawing a reference line that will show me what angle to place my belt at, and then I'm going to move it down to where I think is about the right position to give myself plenty of grip clearance. When you position your snap hardware, be sure and leave just a little bit of clearance above the top edge of your belt. And now I'm roughing in the stitch line and then the top edge of the holster. Be sure you don't cover up the magazine release. You don't want the leather putting any pressure on the button, which could eject the magazine. Leave around 1/4 inch of leather beyond the end of the barrel to help protect the crown of the barrel. And now I'm drawing the sweat shield. I like to keep the edge of the sweat shield away from the thumb so that when you grip the pistol, your thumb is right up against the edge of the holster. And then the front edge of the sweat shield needs to tie into the top edge of the holster on the front side. And now I'm drawing in the reinforcement piece. The reinforcement piece will help stiffen the opening to help keep the holster open. And it also helps to cover the back edge of the T-nuts that will be embedded between the 2 layers of leather. And now I'm just cleaning up some of the line work to blend some lines and emphasize the stitch line. Even though this holster worked out okay, I did forget to add extra clearance for the sight channel. In the next step, I'll be creating the other half of the pattern by folding the pattern along the red line. In reality, I should have folded it along the imaginary blue line, which leaves about 1/4 inch clearance at the muzzle for the front sight. Another option would be to create a parallel line, which would be the green line in this case. That would give you a full-length sight channel. If you'll be forming your holster with an actual firearm instead of a dummy gun, this is probably the method you'll want to use, since it leaves a little more clearance for your sight channel dowel. So right now I'm just cutting around the outside edge of the holster. It can be a little bit confusing as you try to figure out how to cut this to get the different pieces that you need. But just think about the parts you want and what you need to do to get them, and then just take your time. Right now I'm folding the pattern over so I can mirror it. And then I'm tracing the outline. This will become the back edge of the holster. As you can see, I probably should have started the pattern a little bit further to the left so I didn't run off the edge of the paper. This piece I should not have cut off, and I'll be picking that piece up off the floor here in a minute. But now I can cut the sweat shield away. And then I'll finish cutting out the rest of the pattern. There's that piece that I swept away earlier. Now I'm going to trace around the outside of this entire piece, and this will become the main body piece for the holster. And then I'll transfer all the stitch lines and snap hole locations. I'm tracing around the top edge of the reinforcement area on a clean sheet of paper. Now I'm going to mirror the reinforcement piece so that it wraps around to the back side of the holster. And I'm cutting this piece away from the main pattern. And then now I'll transfer this onto a clean sheet of paper. So there's my reinforcement piece template. Now I'm transferring the snap hole locations. We'll only punch those holes through the reinforcement piece, so don't mark them on your body piece because you don't want to accidentally punch holes through the body piece. Those are the start and stop locations for the stitch line on the back edge of the holster in case you want to do a decorative groove. These holes are showing me where the glue line stops for the reinforcement piece. When I label my holster patterns, I only put text on what would be the right-hand side of the holster pattern. That way, if I need to make a left-handed holster and I see text on the pattern, then I know that I'm using the wrong side of the pattern and I need to flip it over. And now that I have clean line work for each of my pattern pieces, I'm cutting them out of the paper so I can start tracing them onto leather. If you have access to a scanner or a copier, now's a good time to go ahead and make a copy of your pattern pieces, just in case you need to print new ones. Now I'm going to start my belt loop template. I'm trying to figure out how much clearance I need to leave between the top edge of the belt and the edge of the belt loop. It's roughly an inch I've found is a good measurement to start with. So I've wrapped a strip of leather that's the same thickness as what I'll use on the belt loop, and I've measured the length with an inch clearance on the top of the belt, and that's how long my overall belt loop piece will be. I'm leaving a 5/16 inch gap between the two belt loop straps, and each of my straps are just a little over 3/4 of an inch wide. My snap holes are roughly 7/8 of an inch apart on my reinforcement piece. So on my belt loop piece, I'm going to space them 1 inch. I like to leave a little bit more clearance, which helps compensate for some of the curve in the top edge of the holster, which actually spreads your mounting holes out just a little bit. Having a separation between the straps lets you put the holster over a belt loop on your pants. It gives a little bit more flexibility in where you wear the holster on your body. Now I'm tracing the pattern pieces onto the leather. This leather is from Wickett Craig, and in case I didn't mention it before, I'm using 7 to 8 ounce leather. I like that they allow you to order individual hides instead of a big bulk order. Makes it a lot cheaper up front, especially if you aren't a big volume maker. I like to ask them to pull a slightly thicker hide and then split it down to my 7 to 8 ounce thickness. That results usually in a cleaner backside, the flesh side of the leather, with less fuzz. They'll split the leather down for no extra charge, but it does add a couple of days to their processing time. Transfer your stitch lines to the inside of the holster so you know where to apply glue later. This is where those 2 dots that we added on the pattern earlier come in handy. They show where to start and stop the decorative groove. I'm applying dye with a wool dauber. It's Fiebing's Pro Oil Dye Saddle Tan. I would normally airbrush the dye, but to make things simpler for the video, I'm showing how it can also be applied with the dauber. Now I'm going to edge and burnish the single layer areas of the holster. This is the opening at the top and the bottom of the holster, and also the bottom edge of the reinforcement piece. We might as well do the belt loops while we're at it. Touch up the edges with dye if there's any natural leather showing through. Now I'm going to burnish the edges with gum tragacanth. You can use whatever edging stuff you prefer. I also use a mixture of beeswax and paraffin. Now I'm burnishing on a Cocobolo burnisher that I picked up from Richard Loy at ProEdgeBurnishers.com. I'm running around 1300 RPM and it's mounted in my drill press. Scuff up the area on the holster body that will be beneath the reinforcement piece. This way the contact cement will get a better bond. Be sure to punch the holes in your reinforcement piece before you apply the contact cement. Don't forget like I did. If you're using T-nuts like these, you may need to trim the prongs off just a little bit so they don't poke through the leather once you assemble the holster. To help set the prongs in the leather, I'm using little leather washers and a socket, and then just hammering it down to push the prongs into the leather. Trim away any excess on the reinforcement and then sand the edges flush. I'm sewing on the Cobra Class 4, and I'm using 277 bonded nylon thread in the top and the bottom. Pull your thread to the inside of the holster and then snip them. Leave them a little bit long so that you have enough to melt and squish flat into a mushroom. This helps to keep the thread from pulling through. Sometimes you won't be able to pull the thread from the front to the back because the needle penetrated it and it gets tangled up. So you'll just have to trim it on the front side and melt it there. That's fine though. And now I'm just touching up the edges, and then I'll burnish them. After I apply the gum trag with a dauber, I usually come back with my fingers to spread it around and work it into the leather just a little bit. The real burnishing starts to happen once the leather begins to dry out just a little bit. This is another Cocobolo burnisher from Pro Edge Burnishers. It's a little smaller diameter and has a different tip on the bottom. It helps to get into smaller radiuses, like this one right here. And it's also nice to have that point on the bottom for burnishing belt slots. It's nice to have options. Now I'm applying contact cement to the inside of the holster. I like to wipe down the interior with a damp sponge with water on it, and then also the reinforcement piece. This just helps the holster fold closed a little bit easier. Also, try not to get water on the outside of the holster body. If the leather's not evenly dampened, it could get water stained. Trim the edges flush to remove any excess. Now it's time to form the holster. I'm just using warm tap water with a little bit of dish soap in it. The soap helps break the surface tension. I've heard it helps the water soak into the leather a little bit better. I don't know if that's true, but it seems to work. It also makes a good fly trap. This dummy gun came with the hammer down and the safety off, so I filed them off and installed my own ambidextrous thumb safety. Since this is a right-handed holster, it doesn't really need the ambidextrous safety, so I went ahead and pulled it off. Most likely anybody using a right-handed holster isn't going to have the ambidextrous safety on there. But if you're going to make your own pattern, you can make it however works best for you. As you may have figured out by now, I'm having a little difficulty with the molded sight channel. The pattern was a little too tight since I forgot to allow for one, so I'm struggling with it to stretch it out just a bit, but in the end it worked out fine. I normally use a vacuum bag to help form my holsters. This time I'm just going to be doing it by hand. If you're interested in building your own vacuum system, I have an article on my website in the blog area that goes over the system that I use. My system isn't powerful enough to actually do any of the molding for you simply with vacuum pressure, but it does help hold the impressions that you put in the leather. It also helps dry some of the moisture out so you can get a little bit more refined detail more quickly. If the leather's too wet, it just gets squishy and it won't hold any detail. I only soaked this holster for less than maybe 15 seconds, and even that was a little too much moisture. If the leather is too dry, it can burnish while you're trying to form some of the details into the leather. So you'll get dark, uneven areas. It looks good on the edges, but maybe not so much on the rest of the holster. As you can see here, you don't really need a lot of tools to be able to mold your holster. I'm just using a pear shader, a bone folder, and a wood burnisher. I'm adding a little bit of definition to the ejection port, but be careful, you don't want to mold it too deep or you'll lock the gun inside the holster. When you're done forming, hang the holster up in front of a fan to dry. Leave the dummy gun inside the holster to prevent shrinkage. Don't leave a real gun inside the wet holster, because that's just asking for rust or corrosion. Soak the belt loop piece in water for a few seconds, and then fold it in half. Set it aside to dry, and you may need to put something on top of it to help keep it flat, so it won't try to open up on you. It's usually a good idea to burnish the interior of the holster to smooth out the leather, especially if your leather was really fuzzy on the flesh side. I'm applying gum trag liberally to the interior, and then I'll come back and smooth it out with that wooden clay modeling tool. I'm sealing the leather with a 50-50 mixture of water and Resilene. I usually apply it to the interior first and let it soak in really well. I try to keep it off of the exterior so that I can just do the interior. And then once the interior gets a little bit dry, I can come back and do the outside. In case you're wondering, this entire build took roughly 2 hours and 15 minutes. With drying time, that usually spans 2 to 3 days. When you apply sealer, you want to make sure that it is applied evenly. The entire exterior needs to be evenly wet. You don't want dark spots and light spots, because that means that some parts didn't get soaked as well. That'll just result in splotchiness. Then hang it up to dry, and then we'll seal the belt loops. Just like with the holster, I like to do the inside first and let it soak in pretty well, and then I'll do the outside and the edges. Be sure to get sealer inside the mounting holes. Once the holster has had a few minutes to dry, I like to come back and touch up the edges again with the wood burnisher. This helps to shine up the Resilene. I learned this trick from Eric Larson at HBE Leatherworks. It's a good tip. Thanks, Eric. I never had much luck installing snaps by hand, so I purchased this press and snap tool quite a few years ago. I've been really happy with it. It works very well. To install the belt loops, I start off with these black leather washers. They help give a little bit more clearance between the belt loops and the waistband. The snap hardware that I'm using is the directional pull the dot snaps. The T-nuts that I use are 6/32 with a 1/4 inch post and they're 1/2 inch wide. And the screws are 6/32 1/2 inch long and they are stainless as well. And the style is called undercut flathead. You can get the T-nuts and the screws from McMaster.com. And the pull the dot hardware I just got from dotfasteners.com. If your holster feels like it has a little bit too much friction or it's too tight, take a little bit of neutral shoe polish and rub it on the contact points inside the holster. This will help break some of that surface friction. If your holster is still too tight, you can stick the gun inside a plastic bag and wrap the bag around the gun, and then stick the gun inside the holster. Let it set for a couple hours, and that should help stretch out the holster a bit. You can also wrap wax paper around the gun and put that inside the holster. Either method should help stretch out the leather a little bit. So, what do you think? I'm personally pleased with the way this holster turned out, even if I did forget to leave enough room for the side channel. If you'd like to make your own and you need a template, be sure to check out my website at adamsleatherworks.com. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I'd love to hear your feedback down in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you on the next build.